Hi everyone, I'm Any New Province, and this week we're playing Enchantment Control for Net Benefits, the series where we explore the benefits of net decking in Pauper. Enchantment Control is an amazing, almost creatureless archetype made popular by content creator Mathonical. Mathonical even did a league run with this deck, and I'll link that down below. I'm probably going to go watch it as a reference to learn how to pilot this thing. Before I get into the deck tech, I just want to let you know that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Alright, let's have a look at Enchantment Control. First, we'll start with our win condition, which is Pestilence. Pestilence costs 2 black for an enchantment, and at the beginning of your end step, if no creatures are on the battlefield, you have to sacrifice it. It's worth the risk because Pestilence allows you to pay a black mana to deal 1 damage to each creature and each player. Not only is this going to allow us to continuously wrath the board and keep our opponent off of creatures, it's going to allow us to deal enough damage to our opponent to win the game so long as our life total is higher than theirs. You're probably thinking we're a 3-color deck that's trying to kill our opponent by amassing enough black mana to do so. Well, it's going to be alright. We have lots of color fixing for that job. Our color fixing starts with Abundant Growth. It costs 1 green mana for an enchantment aura that enchants a land. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. We're off to a good start. The enchanted land has tap, add 1 mana of any color. We're also running 1 main deck copy of Trace of Abundance, which costs 1 hybrid Boros mana and a green mana. It's also an enchantment aura that enchants a land. When that enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional 1 mana of any color, but the thing that makes Trace of Abundance so good is that it gives the enchanted land Shroud. This helps insulate us against things like Capsize and Enrova Horror. We've also got 3 copies of Fertile Ground, which costs 1 and a green for another enchantment aura that enchants a land. Whenever the enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional 1 mana of any color. So with all of this extra mana fixing and even a little bit of ramp, we should be able to deploy our Pestilence early and kill our opponent much more quickly than they may expect. Next, we have our reactive spells. Almost all of them are enchantments. In fact, there's only 1 non-enchantment card. We'll get that out of the way first. It's Gutshot. It costs 1 Phyrexian red mana, which means you can pay 2 life or red mana for Gutshot. It deals 1 damage to any target, probably a fairy or some kind of very important elf. We've also got a copy of Crystallization, which costs a hybrid Simic mana and a white mana. You can enchant a creature with it. That enchanted creature can't attack or block. When the enchanted creature becomes a target of a spell or ability, you exile it. We're also running 3 copies of Kirtar's Desire. It costs 1 white mana for an enchantment. The enchanted creature can't attack, and if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, that enchanted creature can't block either. This is pretty sweet. It's like the least expensive pacifism effect you have access to in Pauper. We have a single copy of Hobble, which costs 2 and a white for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. That's nice. It replaces itself. The enchanted creature can't attack, and if the enchanted creature is black, like a Gurmag Angler, it can't block either. Next up, we have all of our exiling effects, starting with Journey to Nowhere, which costs 1 and a white for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you exile target creature. When it leaves the battlefield, you return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Sometimes your opponent is going to have troublesome non-creature permanents that Journey to Exile can't deal with. That's why we have Oblivion Ring. Oblivion Ring costs 2 and a white for an enchantment, and when it enters the battlefield, you exile target non-land permanent. When Oblivion Ring leaves the battlefield, you return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Next up, we have our proactive enchantments, things that are going to stop our opponent from affecting our side of the battlefield. First, we have Quiet Disrepair, which costs 1 and a green for an enchantment aura. You can enchant an artifact or enchantment, and we're actually going to be enchanting our own enchantments most of the time, at least I think. At the beginning of your upkeep, you choose 1, destroy the enchanted permanent or gain 2 life. I think most of the time we're just content having Quiet Disrepair sit there on the battlefield, gaining us life turn after turn, but if our opponent is on Affinity or something like that, we can throw this on one of their troublesome 4/4s and get it off the battlefield so we don't have to worry about it. We're also running the super sweet Protective Sphere, which costs 2 and a white for an enchantment that allows you to pay 1 and pay pay 1 life. It lets you prevent all damage that would be dealt to you this turn by a source of your choice that shares a color with the mana spent on this activation cost. Protective Sphere is amazing in this deck. We're going to be gaining a ton of life from Quiet Disrepair. We're going to be pacifying everything that can deal damage on our opponent's side, so most of the time our opponent's not going to be able to damage us with anything at all. This also works on choice, so you can target things like Solana Ledgewalker or any Boggle out of Boggles. Finally, our last package is all about card advantage, starting off with the card that makes this deck as powerful as it is. It's Crewfix's Insight. Crewfix's Insight costs 2 and a green for a sorcery and allows you to reveal the top 6 cards of your library, put up to 3 enchantment cards from among them into your hand, and put the rest revealed into your graveyard. I don't think I have to be the one to tell you that drawing 3 cards is incredibly powerful in Pauper, especially when the cards we're drawing can be our win conditions like Pestilence, or just a bunch of ways to deal with our opponent's board until Pestilence comes along naturally. Finally, our last non-land card is Heliod's Pilgrim. It costs 2 and a white for a 1/2 human cleric, and when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an aura card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. If this deck was only going to run 1 creature, this is definitely the creature for the job. Heliod's Pilgrim allows us to run those sweet one-offs like Crystallization and Trace of Abundance, but it can also just get us more redundant copies of auras that we need to deal with very specific threats. Alright, let's have a look at this mana base, and like any 3-color mana base in Pauper, it's a masterpiece, so congrats to Lock W for tuning this mana base for their 5/0. First, we have our non-basics in Blossoming Sands, Jungle Hollow, and Scoured Barrens. These are your Pauper duels in green-white, green-black, and black-white. They enter the battlefield tapped. When they enter the battlefield, they gain you a life, and when they're untapped, they add either green-white, green-black, or black-white respectively. Our last non-basic is a single copy of Unknown Shores. It only adds colorless mana unless you pay 1 when you tap it, then it adds 1 mana of any color. It's okay that it costs a little bit more for Unknown Shores to fix our mana because we're going to have a lot of mana floating around from our land enchantments. For our basics, we're running 7 forests and a single plains. We want a lot of untapped green mana so that we can deploy our ramp enchantments right away, and we've got a little bit of white mana so that we can get our pacifisms and our protective spheres down as soon as we draw them. Alright, let's have a look at this sideboard. First, we have another copy of Protective Sphere if our opponent is dealing a lot of damage. We have 2 copies of Spell Pierce to help us against those non-creature spell decks. We have 2 copies of Curse of the Bloody Tome for an alternate win condition. We have 3 copies of Duress for picking those counter spells out of our opponent's hand. We have a copy of Gutshot for dealing with X1s early in the game when we need to. 2 copies of Relic of Progenitus because against slow decks, we want to be the better slow deck, so we can't have them having a graveyard at all. Finally, we have 4 copies of Aura Gnarlid for turning that clock up against slow decks. And there you have it, Enchantment Control by Lock W. Congratulations with your 5/0 on this sweet archetype, Lock W. We're going to take this deck into a league at twitch.tv/AnyNewProvince this Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Atlantic time. We're there every Wednesday night playing competitive Pauper decks. Before I go, I just want to remind you that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this deck tech, and hopefully I'll see you on Wednesday night.